my name is Ben Brown and this video is on four-in-hand. Now, what is four-in-hand? Well, it's a technique which allows us to play four bells in two hands. So I think the four-in-hand technique is a bit of a misnomer because right now I have three bells in my hands, but this is still four-in-hand position. So I don't love the technique name, but it's a very useful technique nonetheless. So what does it allow us to do? Well, two things. One of the first things it allows us to do is play two bells at once. The other thing we can do is play two bells individually in the same hand. So this is going to be very useful for a couple things. So that two bells at once, you're going to use that a lot when you do things like octaves. And we'll also discuss something called Shelley, which is kind of the older four-in-hand technique for octaves. And I'll explain why I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does the exact same thing for us there. Where four-in-hand has the big advantage over Shelley, though, is I can play these two bells separately, which means I can use it for things like runs, where I don't have quite enough time to weave into an accidental. Or if I'm literally just playing four notes. If I'm playing F, G, A, B, I can use four-in-hand so I can have all those bells in my hands at once. And then I can play my nice chromatic chord right now because I have F, F sharp, G, and G sharp.
Yeah, I piled a bunch of stuff up.
So that's four-in-hand, and I'm going to go
if it doesn't fall over,
how to do it. I'm going to
there.
start with the Shelley technique. So I set up this overhead position so that you can better see exactly what I'm doing with my bells and with my hands. And I remove my gloves to better contrast with the dark table. Now for my Shelley, I'm going to start with my bells in my normal position with the flats of my handles facing up. You always want to make sure that you've got the flats up, not the loops of the handles. I'm going to lay my top bells down like this. The big thing with Shelley is that when you put down your top bell, the flat is still facing up for both bells. This is what makes it the Shelley position. And you want to make sure your bells are facing inwards. You don't want this. So, we're in our Shelley position, and now I'm going to pick up my bells. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this claw. These are the three important fingers. These two are going to grab the bottom bell, and these two the top. These two are just going to be there for support. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that claw. I'm going to go down across that bottom bell, and then I'm going to grab the top bell with my thumb, and then my last two fingers are just going to go around the top bell's handle there to kind of support that bell. So this is how I'm going to hold my Shelley. I'll do the same thing with my left hand. Create that claw, grab the bottom bell first, then use the thumb to put around the top bell, and then my last two fingers are just there for support. So it's going to look something like this. So when I ring my Shelley, I'm going to bring my bells up, just like I normally would, and I'm going to move them about 45 degrees out. Now the reason I do this is this. If you look at this bell, I can do this. I can ring that top bell by itself because gravity's kind of helping it out. The bottom bell, though, is very hard. Now that may seem like an advantage, except you really never want to be able to do that when you're shelling. If I have it at a 45-degree angle, that means both bells are going to bring it in the same plane every time. So I always get a nice even ring. Now the issue with Shelley is that I can only ring two bells together. I can never ring them separately, or at least I shouldn't be ringing them separately. Depending on gravity, to get that bottom bell doesn't really help in many songs, which is why we have four-in-hand, which is what I'm going to show you next. I've gone back to the overhead view for four-in-hand, and four-in-hand is going to look exactly the same on the bottom. Two bells, normal position, with the flats of the handles facing up. Now what we're going to do with four-in-hand, though, is when we lay down our bells on top, we're going to start basically like normal, and then we're going to rotate them 90 degrees so that the bell symbol is facing us. We're going to do that with both bells. So now we've got the loop of the handle facing up instead of a flat. So this is four-in-hand, and the only difference is that 90-degree rotation. Now we're going to grab it the exact same way. Create your claw. We're going to go down over the bottom bell with those two fingers, and then we're going to use our thumb to grab that side one, and it's going to look something like this. And then our other fingers are just going to grab around and kind of hang out. Same thing with my left hand. Over the bottom bell, grab the top bell, other fingers are just going to grab and hang out, and now I'm in four-in-hand position. So now that our hands are in four-in-hand position, we're going to practice actually ringing them. So when I lift my bells up, I now have two new ringing positions. That's one of the unique things about four-in-hand. If I turn my hand sideways to what I would consider a normal ringing position, with the back of my hand facing the wall, I can do what I call a ring. I'm going to ring the top bell in my four-in-hand cluster. Now the bottom bell is going to be rung by what I like to call a knock. Just like knocking on a door, we're going to have the back of our hand facing kind of up and back, and we're just going to rap on the door. So this is our basic four-in-hand technique. Now we do have a third one. So if I take my bells in front of me, and I kind of look in between those bells, I kind of rotate it until I can't see in between them anymore, which will be about a 45-degree rotation. Very different than my Shelley one though. I can now ring them like this. I can get both of them to ring at once. This is why I like four-in-hand over Shelley for most cases, because I can ring them both at once just like I can in Shelley, but I can also separate them and ring them separately. Another little thing that I've noticed is that when I have the handles like this, when I have them together in my Shelley position, the loop of the handle kind of pushes into my palm. It's a little harder to get my pinky finger around that loop. It's just a little more uncomfortable for me. Some people like it more because they feel it gives them a little more grip, but I prefer four-in-hand where I've got the flat against my palm, and now there's a little more room for my fingers, and I find this just to be a little more comfortable. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be back in my far out position because you really need to be able to see the pads to understand what's going on. So now that we understand how to get in and out of four-in-hand, or at least into four-in-hand, we need to know how we're going to position our bells, which bell goes where. And the reality is that a lot of this is up to personal preference, and it's going to depend on what you're actually doing with your bells. So let's talk those octaves. When I'm playing four-in-hand and I'm trying to get an octave, I'm almost always going to have the smaller bell on the bottom. The reason I like to do it this way is because when I put that bell down, I can get rid of it out of my hand, and you're often going to be switching that octave bell out and in. You don't really need to hold it the whole time, and if I need to switch to something else, I want to be able to break that four-in-hand. And it's pretty rare that this smaller bell is the one that's going to be playing more often than the larger one. So that's normally what I'm going to do when I'm doing octaves. Now when I'm doing something like a chromatic scale, there's a couple ways to do that. The first way I've learned is this. I'm going to take my chromatics and put them on top of my naturals. If I had 4 naturals in front of me, what I'm doing is actually keyboard order. So I'm doing F and F sharp in my left hand, G and G sharp in my right. So my left hand is playing the lower bells and my right bell the higher ones. So that works quite well. It's not necessarily the best way to do it or the worst, it's just a way to do it. There's something I've learned more recently that I like to use when I'm doing something quicker though. And this sees me putting my 2 higher bells on my 2 lower bells. Now if I had all naturals, this would be lines and spaces in my left hand and my right hand, or vice versa. There's a couple reasons this can be nice. This is going to sound ugly, but normally this works a little better for chords, so you can play 1 chord in each hand, and for chromatics I get to do this for my scale. I get to go nice and fast because I get to play my left, my right, my left, and my right as I go up or down. So it's very handy for when you're doing something fast. The only issue with this, it's not really an issue, it's just brain training. It's a little harder for some people to do because we're so used to having our left hand play the lower bell and our right hand play the higher. Having those things separated out so that we have our two lower bells on the bottom position of our forehand and the two upper bells in the upper position can be a little confusing for our brains. But I find it works quite well. So we can ring, we know where to put our forehand. Now we have to do the next step, which is damping. Now you may have noticed when I was doing my forehand runs and I was showing you how things worked, I didn't always damp everything out. I'm being pretty sloppy with my damping there. And the reason is when I'm going up a scale, it's actually very hard to damp that bottom note on my shoulder before I play my top note. If I try to do that, it looks something like this. I have to play that top note right off of my shoulder, which is pretty unnatural looking. If I do a circle with that, it just doesn't look great. So when I'm going up a scale, I normally like to do this. And this is a little practice you can do. I'm going to do nice and slow once and then a little faster. So I'm going to ring my bottom bell in my left hand, and as I go down, I'm going to table damp it and ring my top bell and bring it up, which will then be damped on my shoulder. My right hand will follow suit. Bottom bell is going to ring, damp on the table. Top bell will ring as I go up to damp on my shoulder. It's going to sound something like this. And I can do that a little faster. So this is just a little thing you can do. Just keep going up that scale. So, I can go down, right? Well, not so much, because if I try to do the same thing going down, it's a little awkward. I get into the exact same problem I had trying to go up and damping on my shoulder. Because I just damped my top bell on my shoulder, trying to damp my bottom bell on the table doesn't work out so well. So when I'm going down, I actually tend to just do everything as shoulder or body damping. Again, I can't do my big circles here when I'm going down the scale, but I'm trying to go pretty fast, so that's not too big of a problem. So as I go down, I tend to body, and as I go up, I tend to table and shoulder damp. So let's go both directions. I'll try to say it over my bells, so I'll try to play kind of quietly. So I'm going to go table, shoulder, table, shoulder, 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 shoulder. So I'll let you practice that on your own, and then for the sake of time, I'm going to go to my next technique. Really, I guess I could keep that in forehand. So, we can damp, but what happens when we have fun techniques like thumb damping? Well, thumb damping the top bells is easy. Just bring your thumbs up, you're good to go. The bottom bells are a little more complex, because what I have to do for those is I have to get one of my fingers, or both, onto the casting. I can kind of wiggle it while they're up, but I find it's normally easier to do it when it's on the table. So if I have a whole lot of thumb damp in a row, I can just put it down, kind of grab the casting with my fingers. Now my claw is kind of up above my handle, and I can thumb damp. Now of course it takes a little time to get into that, so it's not something you're necessarily going to be able to do on the fly. You need a little prep time for your thumb damps if you have to thumb damp your bottom bell. Now, of course, if you have a single thumb damp in a run, what you can do is just you flip your position and make sure whichever bell is going to thumb damp is the one on top, because that's going to be easy, even if that means my forehand feels backwards, because really your bells can, in fact, go anywhere. Now, our martellados are going to be backwards. When I'm marting, the bottom bell is already set for the mark technique. It's the top bell that's the problem. Because the top bell, if I try to go in, well, the clappers are facing forward. So the two things I can do are, I can separate my bells, but if I try to do that with any speed, I end up doing mark lifts. So it's not always going to be the best way to do it. What I tend to do is this. When I go down to mark, I'm going to let my bottom bells roll into Shelley position. That way, when I'm down on the table, Instead of my top bell being facing sideways, it's facing down. So now I can do this. So everything's facing down, and then when I need to ring it, I can just kind of roll it back into forehand. And I double check my F sharp there, and I'm good to go. So nothing too complex, but if you try that as your very first thing, you're probably going to run into some issues. One of the biggest things about forehand is practice. You shouldn't really be trying this martellado thing right from the get-go. It's hard enough just to get into that forehand position, so trying to roll that into your Shelley position and get that ready and then roll back, it's going to kind of freak you out if that's the first thing you try to practice. So don't. Try to understand how to do it, but don't go straight into those advanced techniques. What you want to do is you want to start simple. You want to start with the easy songs. One of the big issues people have with forehand is they're told, okay, you have this crazy run, the only way to do it is forehand, now go. And that's going to be almost impossible, because if you've never done it before, unless you're a bell savant, mastering forehand in just over an hour is going to be very complex. So what I would recommend is you practice this on a song with a lot of whole notes and half notes. When you've got a whole measure on either side, where you can carefully look down, set your forehand, fiddle with it, get it up, and be ready to go. Maybe it's something where you can keep it like this the whole song. If you're playing smaller bells, that's not too uncomfortable. It's just something to do. That way, if you keep doing that on songs that are relatively easy, you're going to be able to get this faster. You're going to get used to doing it without looking. I should be able to get into my forehand without ever having to look down and get them back to where I started. So that's something that's only going to come with practice, and then by the time you need that fast one where you have to be able to do that, you're going to be good to go. Now, which bell should be forehand? Well, that's also going to be a little more dependent on the person. You're probably never going to try to forehand your C3s if you're one of those 5-octave choirs with them. But some people can get away with forehanding a C4. Not that many though. For the most part, you're going to look at C5 and up as a forehandable range, and really for most people that's going to be even smaller than that. F sharp and up is a nice easy range that most people can handle, but for some it's only going to be the 6s that you can actually fit into your hands. I have pretty large hands, so I can forehand rather large bells. But if you can't, don't make yourself. If the forehand is hurting, you're doing it wrong. So make sure you're always in a comfortable position when you're forehanding. Now the last thing I'd like to talk about is something called traveling forehand. Now traveling forehand is actually just forehand. There's really nothing different in the technique. I'm still going to take my bell, put it on my bottom bell just like I would. The thing with traveling forehand though is I'm going to pick up that bell and ring it and put it right back down and get it out of my hand, because that hand has to do something else. So the whole idea of traveling forehand is you're not in forehand for a long time. It's traveling. You're picking up a bell and putting it back down immediately. That way you can do something like this. And this is how I practice traveling forehand. So I'm going to have a single bell in my hand. That's always going to be my top bell. And then I'm just going to switch between two bottom bells. So I can't really do fancy circles, I can't make things look nice, but it's a nice way to practice just getting that bell in and out of your hand. Of course, the biggest thing with traveling forehand is you have to be able to do what I just did, and that's pick up those bells without really having to look for it. A very important thing with any forehand technique, just like weaving, is you have to put the bells back down where you found them. If I go to pick up this in a forehand position, my G sharp needs to go back where I found it so that I know where to find it again, and my neighbor knows where to find their A flat. Quick close-up view of that traveling forehand, so you can note how I'm keeping that top bell in my hand that whole time and just using that little claw to grab my bottom bells. With that, I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope this tutorial was useful, and if you do have any questions that weren't answered in the live session, please leave them below in the comments and we'll try to get back to you. I encourage you to practice this to try to learn forehand, because I can assure you, It really is quite fun once you get used to it, and four in hand is an incredibly important technique on your path to becoming a true bell hog.
And we're back. Thanks, Ben, for that great video. Now, our current panel will be me, Mel, Debbie, Barb Cote, and Linda again. And this will be a little shorter panel because we're also going to do a little game with Mel to get everyone up and moving. So, we didn't see too many questions go across the YouTube chat, so I'm just going to go around and discuss how you four in hand, how often do you do it, what's the bells you can four in hand, that kind of thing. So I'm going to start with the top of my screen, which is Mel.
I can four in hand the F5 and G5, but my hands are quite small, so if I can get away with it, I prefer to weave. Yes,
So yeah,
not.
we do have a lot in our group, especially the bass ringers aren't as big into the four in hand. How about you, Debbie?
I believe the biggest bells I have four-handed are also the F and G5. I also have very small hands. And I know that I have to do that in Michael Glasgow's Gaudete. I prefer to try to weave because I love the Tintab dance with that, but sometimes it just doesn't work.
Barb Cote?
I know that I have four-handed down as far as G4, not for a prolonged period of time, but for a few measures I've done that. If I can, I'll use a weave, but if it's too fast to weave, I'll do traveling four in hand.
And Linda.
Yeah, I think it's also the F and G, and that's pretty much pick up, put down. I don't know how much four in hand that is. But yeah, the sixes and the sevens. And I think a lot of times the sixes and the sevens, it's a lot easier to four in hand than try to weave.
And personally, I mean, I've done the C3 with Larry Sue, for those who've seen him in the chat. You can't really ring it though, because the way the bell plates work, the bells end up clanking against each other when you try to four in hand that low. So the biggest I've actually rung would be like the G3, but the biggest I've rung in a song would probably be the C4. And even that's going to be pretty rare.